So, welcome to Israel. And it's a unique location we have in Sderot, not in Jerusalem, not in Tel Aviv. You visited today's kibbutz of Nir Oz. One-fourth of the people there were either murdered or kidnapped. And I know you follow the war from close since it broke out on October 7. But now that you were here, that you saw in your own eyes what happened in the kibbutz, what happened in the Nova Festival, what is the other impression, the extra impression you got after being here?
Everything was magnified. So my sadness felt deeper. My anger felt stronger. My concern was greater. And so I leave here, it was important for me to be able to tell Americans why they should care. I think it's Americans are very smart. They're unified with Israel. They really are. They do very much feel a bond with Israel. But they need to feel the pain of this, because to go and see what I saw and the fact in the kibbutz, it's house after house after house, and the detail that went into it, the brutality that went into it, and from, whether it was murders or burning bodies alive or, all of the horrendous things that happened to young women, whether they were raped or mutilated or any of those things. Every one of those was horrific. Every one felt like a nightmare. But we have to acknowledge that it happened, because when you acknowledge that it happened, then there are no excuses for why we don't hold the right people accountable.
In what scenario you see that it could happen, anything like that in the United States?
I mean, you look and we have an open border. Our border is completely open. Anyone can come in. We don't vet. We don't do anything. It's not taken seriously, and that's the concern we have. We also know that when these Iranian terrorists, they say death to Israel, what do they say next? Death to America. And we have to believe them when they say this. They are saying this because they truly want to destroy all that is free, that is a democracy, that is the West. Like, that's what they want to do. We can't help them do that. And that's why it's important for Americans to know Israel is fighting America's enemies.
And an October 7 event or massacre actually can happen in America?
I mean, look, we had 9/11 happen in America. And that was the unthinkable. For us, we thought we were untouchable. We didn't think something like that could happen. And we watched such an orchestrated plan happen. This is like Israel's 9/11. It was unimaginable. And so first you go through shock. How could this happen? Then you go through total sadness of the images and the people, and especially in Israel, everyone knew each other. And then you get to anger. But the lesson in all of that is, what do you do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And the best way to make sure it doesn't happen again is to do it right the first time. And we know as long as Hamas exists, it can happen again. And that's why I've said from the very beginning, you need to finish them once and for all.
Okay. You mentioned Iran, and I agree, of course, Iran is behind that. But Iran is very close to reach a bomb. Now, including in your period as ambassador, and actually many administrations, I believe in the last 2 decades, maybe more, put a lot of sanctions on Iran, but still they are becoming closer and closer. Isn't it time, unfortunately, no other choice, to use military force to stop the Iranian nuclear plan? Otherwise, they're going to reach a bomb, and very soon.
The first thing you have to do is where everything is not being done that should be done. So if Iranian sanctions were put on, why aren't they being followed? So much Iranian fuel is being sold to China. China's giving all of this money to Iran. Iran takes that money, they give it to their proxies. Why aren't we enforcing the sanctions? The second thing is, sanctions were lifted that need to come back down on Iran. Whenever you give Iran money, they continue to fuel terrorism. And they'll lie, and they'll cheat, and they'll steal, and they'll do whatever it takes, but they are going to continue to get closer and closer to a nuclear bomb. And they're very close to it now.
But are sanctions enough? Because we tried it for many years.
First, you have to follow the sanctions and enforce them. The second thing, as I have said, I think that it's really important that we go after key IRGC members and make them feel it. We have to start letting them feel what it's like to be weakened, and they haven't had that. I don't think we go into a full war in Iran. That's not what we're talking about, but we do need to send some messages, and that means if you have to take out some key IRGC members...
Take out, you mean kill them?
Finish them.
There was another interesting point I heard in your press conference. I think you were the first one to say that, and that is that Russia gave intelligence to Hamas to help them make the massacre? I never heard about that, but I think it's very interesting.
I think that we know that Russian intelligence was involved in helping Iran and Hamas do what they did. And I think that's very important that people know that this is, Russia's trying to play both sides of the fence. They can't play both sides of the fence. Russian intelligence was used to learn about Israeli bases, to learn what had happened, all of those things. They need to be held accountable for their part in this. They can deny it all they want, but the Russian intelligence was involved. Hamas wouldn't have had all the information. The second thing is, Russia was struggling with Ukraine. They had lost 87% of their fighting forces that started the war. They raised the draft age to 65. They did not win it in 5 days like they thought they were going to do. And so they were getting weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And how is it that all of a sudden you've got this happen on October 7th? And what happened? The world's eyes turned from Russia and Ukraine and started looking at Israel. It's the best birthday present Putin ever got, because all of a sudden it turned America and the West to now look at Israel.
Do you think we are, or we might be soon, in a third world war? Are we close to that?
We shouldn't want that to happen. But what we should do is make sure that we get rid of the enemies. And that's why I think it's important for America and any freedom-loving country to understand standing with Israel is fighting our enemies. And that's the part that we have to understand. And that's the part the Arab community has to also admit. The Arab countries know that Iran is a problem. So they shouldn't continue to, have their back and take care of them. They need to call it out too, because they are in danger just as much. They've seen what Iran's done. We all see what the Houthis do, what Hamas does, what Hezbollah does. All of those proxies that are doing it, that's all fueled by Iran. And so Iran is not just an Israel problem. Iran's not just an America problem. Iran is a world problem that we have to deal with. I mean, I think the Arab countries, there's a reason that they're not taking any of the Palestinians, because they don't know which ones are Palestinians. They don't know which ones are Hamas. But they should at least be standing up saying that was Iran. We need Qatar to say, don't just be a mediator with hostages. Get those hostages home. What are you doing to help get the hostages home? We've got to start putting more pressure on the Arab countries to help us in terms of defeating Hamas, in terms of calling Iran out for what they did, and to making sure this doesn't happen again. The reason they're quiet is because they know who did this. They know Iran started this. They know Hamas did this. And they know Hezbollah can be next. And we need to be aware of that. I think from the West standpoint, the West needs to understand this is a war that we have to be in together. This is incredibly important, because when they say death to Israel and they follow it with death to America, they're making a promise. We should make sure we hear what their promise is and do everything we can to stop that from coming true.
We do see military help or deliveries coming from the United States since the beginning of the war. But at the same time, President Biden 2 weeks ago made a halt for a few weeks of some of the ammunition. And we see, I would say, double message coming from the administration. Is that the right way America should treat Israel these days?
Republicans and Democrats need to understand that this is a war we all need to make sure we finish. And if you're a friend, be a true friend. So if we want to be a friend to Israel, the best thing America can do is let Israel do its job and just support. We shouldn't be preaching to Israel. We shouldn't be telling them how to win the war. We shouldn't telling them what they can or can't do. We should just be saying, what else do you need? Bottom line, that's it. That's what I want to see America do, is be a friend, a true friend, and make sure all the other countries that are aligned with us are a true friend with Israel too.
And once the administration is not going on this way, but do tell us what to do. For example, don't go to Rafah. Bring more and more humanitarian supply and so on, which goes to Hamas. What should Israel do? Listen to everything that the administration is saying, or take the way we find is the right one?
Israel needs to tune out the noise and finish the job. We know that they have to go into Rafah. I know they have to go into Rafah because that's so much where the Hamas movement still is. For them not to go into Rafah is to leave the terrorists still in power. I also know that a lot of the aid that is going into Gaza is feeding Hamas, fueling Hamas, they're using it, and the Palestinians really aren't getting much of it. But this goes back to the fact that if the Palestinians want a better life, they need to get rid of Hamas. They need to change leadership. They need to understand that they are in this situation because of the leaders around them. This is not Israel's job to save the Palestinians. The Palestinians should want to save themselves by getting rid of the terrorists who are trying to control them, who are using them as human shields, and start demanding that.
And it's a problem for us, and I think you mentioned that, to differ between Hamas and the Palestinians, because as you said, thousands of them came of the civilians, right? As if Palestinians civilians came and actually took part of the massacre. But
I mean, that needs to get out. That's hugely important. You had 3,000 Hamas terrorists come and invade that border, but thousands of Palestinian citizens also came, also did so many destructive things, also helped with the murders. That can't be overlooked, because what that means to Israel's security, they don't know who they can trust and who they can't. The rest of the world can't say, oh, be nice to the Palestinians, when these are some of the people who murdered their brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. And the world needs to understand that. You can't ask them to do that. That's an unfair ask to ask anyone in Israel to suddenly be able to go and put all of that aside to help the Palestinians. They don't know who to trust. That's not Israel's fault. That's the Palestinians' fault now. Now they have to show us how we can trust them again.
So maybe at least part of the solution for the long run should be, as you said, I think in the beginning of the war, let those Gazans who do not want to live in Gaza, it's very close to us, don't want to live here, go abroad, go to other places and resettle in other places. Is that okay with you?
I think that the Arab countries, if they're as concerned about the Palestinians as they say, they should take them. I've always said that, where is Egypt in all of this? Where is Qatar in all of this? Why aren't they taking them? It's the same thing that happened when I was at the United Nations and I cut aid to UNRWA. I cut aid to UNRWA because I saw what was happening in the schools. I visited the schools. They weren't changing the teaching. They weren't changing the textbooks. You could see the graffiti on the walls. I saw everything that was happening, and they weren't doing anything to change it. We eliminated the funding in UNRWA. The new administration sent that money back to UNRWA, and what happened? You see all of those principals, teachers, everyone, they were actually Hamas terrorists that were doing this. You see that the tunnels underneath and the data centers underneath, the electricity came from UNRWA schools. I'm going to ask again, are all of those Arab countries willing to fund UNRWA after that? Should UNRWA continue to even exist after that? It shouldn't. And so that goes back to the United Nations. That goes back to the ICC, the ICJ. Why did you have strikes in Tel Aviv yesterday? Because when the ICC does that, you just embolden the terrorists to do it again.
What should Israel do when you have such decisions coming from Hague, from the ICC and from the ICJ?
I mean, for the ICC to even in the same paper mention Israel and Hamas in the same sentence is disgusting. And what I will tell you is there's a reason the United States doesn't give credibility to the ICC. But the ICC just showed the world again why they don't deserve any credibility. That it was immoral the way they came out and did that. You can't put the two side by side and say the same thing. I want the ICC, everything that they have mentioned about Israel, now do Hamas. What are you going to say about the mutilations of those girls? What are you going to say about the rapes of those girls? What are you going to say about the fact that they still hold hostages? What are you going to say about the fact that they burned bodies alive and bragged about it? What are you going to say about the video that came out last week of the girls sitting there and them saying these would be good to get pregnant? That's what I want the UN to focus on. That's what I want the ICC to focus on. Israel, they're the good guys. And you know what I want Israelis to know? You're doing the right thing. Don't let anybody make you feel wrong, because Israel is not wrong in this. There are a lot of countries in the world that are wrong because they're siding with the terrorists. That needs to end. And we need to acknowledge the fact that the last thing Israel needs is for us to go stab them in the back when they're already down.
So at least those countries who are members in the ICC, like Germany, France, and so on, should they obey towards the ICC said, actually arresting Netanyahu and Gallant, our defense minister?
Absolutely not. Because if they do that, you're siding with the terrorists. There is no gray between Hamas and Israel. This is the difference between who started it, Hamas, and who's trying to finish it. If this had happened to any of those countries, any of them, I guarantee you they would be doing the same thing, and probably not as careful as Israel is to try and prevent loss of life. I think we should be sanctioning the ICC and the ICJ, at least from the American standpoint, and I have called on Congress to do that. They should sanction them, because if they are going to start to make these kinds of rulings to our friends, we should let them know that there's a price to pay when you do that.
Because it's problematic for Israel, or the decisions are problematic for America?
This should be problematic for any country who just witnessed what happened on October 7th. And to know that an organization is going to find fault with the leader of Israel when they've lost 1,200 citizens, brutally murdered, and you're going to go and do that, every one of those countries would have defended themselves. Every one of those countries would have probably done worse things than what Israel did. So, no, I think it's a danger to Israel, but it's a danger to all of us, where that could happen and they could turn around and do the same thing to us.
Positions you hold regarding Israel, regarding freedom actually, where is it coming from? You don't find so many American or even foreign leaders who are so strong supportive of Israel, but in my opinion, at least understand where the truth is. So where is it coming from?
It's very organic. I did not know, I was the first governor in America to pass BDS legislation to make sure that we did an anti-BDS movement. That was because it was just the right thing to do. At what point are you going to go and say, we're not going to do deals with Israel when Israel was a freedom-loving democracy? We should do that. Why aren't we doing that to North Korea? Why aren't we doing that to Syria? Why aren't you focused on... And that wasn't happening. So that was something that as a governor, I just saw that was important. When I got to the United Nations, I actually didn't have a lot of knowledge on Israel or a lot of knowledge on the challenges that they face. I had heard of them, but until you see it and experience it, and in that first meeting I had on the Middle East, I went in expecting us to talk about challenges in the Middle East. And all they did, one by one, every country, was Israel bashing over and over and over again. And I couldn't believe what I thought, what I saw. And then all that did was tell me these were a bunch of bullies. And here Israel's sitting here. I mean, they're a bright spot in a tough neighborhood. They're constantly trying to survive. Why would we ever allow that to happen? And I just keep watching it. So then I would see every time when Israel would get hit, everybody would run to Israel and say, oh, we're so sorry. But when Israel hits back, the world is quick to go and criticize Israel. And it happens over and over again. And so every time it happens, I'm going to keep calling it out because it's wrong.